message too. So I almost feel Louis, at the moment, we should discuss what we want to submit and have one person to be the focal to submit. And that person doesn't have to be the person who is actually be speaking. And as to who is going to be speaking, I think we should take volunteers, like you said, and we should also balance out when the KubeCon result acceptance coming out, right? Because the preference would probably be given to people who didn't have a talk accepted, right? Because that person would already have a free ticket from the other track from KubeCon, so they wouldn't need the free ticket for the maintainers. So my preference would be given to people who have 0 talk accepted at KubeCon.
Yeah, I'm fine with that, Lynn. I think my only other requirement is not you and Mitch.
That's totally cool. Yeah, I'm totally cool with that. And I honestly, I think like for folks, I know some folks have visa issued in US, like Neeraj, for example. I'm just giving an example. And people probably in China, it's harder for them to travel to US. So that maybe could be given a little bit of preference for EU. Yeah. And then I think the most important thing is we want to find a focal person, make sure we submit before the deadline so that we don't miss the opportunity as a project.
Right. So KubeCon notifications don't go out until February 6th. That might be too long for us to delay on this. I don't know.
Yeah, we should do this before Christmas.
Yeah, we should submit. And then for the speaker, we can always, adjust as needed.
Okay.
So Neeraj, you're a tentative yes? Is that correct?
Yeah, for now. Why don't we start a doc and then, I don't know, we can just at least make sure the proposal aligns with.
You don't know. The deadline here is just to apply to do the talk.
Or you don't even have to submit an agenda or anything?
No.
Okay. Yeah, so you can put my name.
The agenda, it's just the maintainer session for Istio is like the abstract, right?
Okay, I see.
Like I'm sure you can submit a more detailed one later, but effectively, right? I don't think there's anything in the application.
Yeah, you can put down my name. Is there anyone else from Google team who's already planning to
go? Several of us have applied to give talks from Google. John, Justin, me. John, do you know of anyone else who's applied to give a talk?
Mitch, Zonghu. Oh, did you say from Google? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ray also.
Okay. Yeah. And then yes, Mitch, I know you submitted something, right?
Yeah.
And I'm willing to bet money, Lynn, you have as well. Well, you have a panel, right?
Of course, I submit something. Yeah, but the acceptance rate is very low. I'm actually on the review committee, so I know who submitted everything, but I don't want to say it a lot here. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's been a while since you talked, Neeraj, at a conference.
Yeah.
After moving back, I mean, like, just haven't been able to come back to US, man. The visa was continuing. I've been speaking in India and Australia.
That's why it's good for you to go.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, subject to my wife allowing me to go with a young kid, it is yes.
All right. Well, how about you apply for the track, and then if you can't go, then we can always do a swap. Right?
Yeah, sounds good. So I'll just apply. We don't need a second speaker yet. That's good.
I don't think so. Yeah. Plus, who's going to come into the room and tell you not to have other people talk?
Good.
I don't know about the maintainer talks, but I thought there was some limits on changing out speakers, particularly the primary speaker on the other talks.
I think maintainer talk doesn't apply to that limit.
Yeah, we can figure this out.
Okay.
But that's a good point.
Because maintainer talks are more or less guaranteed accept.
Exactly.
Yeah, I thought there might be a different criteria, but I know sometimes they've been difficult with the other talks, with the primary speaker can't make it. But okay.
Neeraj, young kids love Amsterdam, so you could just bring them along.
Not sure I would love that. But yeah, good point.
Okay.
So I think I'm up next on the agenda, but I'll go ahead and defer because I see some important stuff down below me I want to make sure we get to. So that means Daniel, release manager pain points, I think is next up.
I just want to highlight here because it seems like this might be a good audience. When it comes to the release managers with cutting branches, there's a few, I guess, pain points. This is the best way to describe it. That has to do with timing. So, for example, when we send out the branch cut announcements, according to the issue, we're not supposed to be continuing merging PRs, but it's also kind of unrealistic to expect that to stop for several hours to a couple days. But it does cause some issues when you go to cherry pick back to the branches if you beat the label being done or prowl being set up. But there's a couple others that are bigger issues, like getting PR approvals. Sometimes those can take a day or two before all the work groups get through and approve them. As well as getting long running tests scheduled. And that's the biggest one. Is there's only one person that I know of, and it's Sam. I'm not trying to name drop, but he's the only person I know that knows how to do the long running tests. And he's also really busy, so trying to get a response from him can take days to weeks to sometimes hear back. So would like to highlight that ideally the long running test should be runnable by any release manager without having to be somebody from Google, or that we need a resource available that can be responsive to get these done, because there were a couple pings about getting betas cut that we were just struggling through the entire branch cutting process, so we weren't even close to getting a beta cut.
Dan, this is Eric. For the first thing you mentioned was the trying to get approvers, and I'm assuming this is probably the code owners update PRs is my guess.
That was one of them, as well as the branch protection that, you know, we never got a response from the on-call, you know, and without
Okay.
having you involved in the process was, you know, that would have been even worse.
Yeah,
Well,
I
I know, 'cause,
remember
you know,
there
the
was
other thing I was going to say is a couple of us I know can force merge PRs, so we could probably get around that if one of us is around.
yeah, I
Um,
ended up doing that actually. So I believe the prowl maintenance, they never reply after a few days. We end up force merge, which is not great. So that we can get around. I think the biggest issue, so basically I asked Daniel to bring this up because he was very frustrated with release management and be able to have to depend on Google engineers to do stuff. So even though we're trying to push for non-Googlers to lead the release, but we're not fully there yet. So it's good to have these pain points laid out and then figure out how can we make it easier if the direction is still everybody else in the community can be the release manager, not just the Google engineers, which I assume it is.
Yeah, because there's a few points that you have to have a Googler involved, and the steps were not very well laid out. Like, for example, there was one step about building and tagging new build tools images. And Eric and I spent an entire day going back and forth by DM trying to figure out the steps so we could tell John exactly what he needed to run, because nobody else had any idea, and the Googler that had done it before was not available by DM. So trying to
there is that step. I mean, there's a couple of steps, right, that require Googlers. Well, we mentioned the prowl on call approval. There is the step where we need somebody who has the approvals to retag images in gcr.io. So is that, you know, always going to be only a Googler? I don't know. That might change. And then, of course, we have the test thing. And I know Stuart was talking at one point about providing some docs to make that so non-Googlers could maybe do it. I know I've run it on IBM hardware before. So maybe there's something we can do slightly different there. But I mean, the problem there is we do need to come up with hardware to run those long-running tests on. And it's usually pretty big image, pretty big, containers we got to run. So, and a number of them. So it's a pretty big cluster we have to spin up.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to 117, and I don't want to set them up for failure, give them the tools to succeed, and that's why I extended out, especially the retagging. I extended out that issue so that they don't have as many problems with it. But at the same time, there's still a reliance on Googlers, and we need to make sure that we have a resource available that can assist with those steps if we don't have access to do it.
Yeah, that certainly sounds reasonable. I also don't see a reason why we can't, if at least delegate the permission in some cases. So you guys have been working with Stuart to try and figure this out?
I haven't personally. I think Eric did a little bit, but
Stuart is definitely the right person,
long
right?
running test. Yeah, Stuart was going to do some documentation around how to do some of that, and I mean, we don't always get Stuart's time, so we could probably try to do something. I mean, I could try to do something to make it so that we could run them on IBM Cloud, but then okay, you're now reliant on Samurai. I don't know that that's a lot better.
Yeah, I don't think it's not where they run, right? It's just that they are run and they can be triggered by somebody who is, at least in an ACL on GitHub, right, to be able to trigger it.
Well, it's not. I don't even think it's that. I think it's just, at least if I understand it, and Sam would have to correct me. I think it's just a number of scripts that set up. So basically, it's it's fairly manual. Do your cluster setup. Run some scripts to set some things up, and then run the scripts to actually run the test. So it's not automated, at least at this point.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious answer there would be to automate it.
Yeah.
But there's quite a backlog, so.
And like I said, it sort of becomes, where can you run it becomes the issue, because you have to either have, a fairly expensive set of clusters set up, or but yeah, let me talk to Sam and see if there's something we can do to simplify that one. And I don't know who to talk to about, potentially getting creds for, GCR.io, so that we can run that. The other option there is to actually go and turn on the automation that I do have for some of that steps. I mean, we have most of it coded up, but we don't have it so that it's run by the pipeline. If the pipeline was running that particular step, right, the pipeline has the appropriate authorities, it could do it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, Stuart is definitely the right person to try and work this out with. And I think he would be happy to see more of this automated, so.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you,
And as
Eric.
an aside, Daniel, I did have a note here in my notebook that there is a to-do to sit down with you and talk to you about that release builder stuff, and to see what we can do to make that better as well. Because I know there's a couple of things in there, like you have to wait, but then you one job to run, so you got to kill it. There's some things we should probably try to do to simplify some of that.
Yeah, yeah, and I made some notes, especially on the one where I merged it and then saw the note at the end that, hey, don't merge that step. But I clarified the issue a little bit. But yeah, just shoot me a DM and we'll get together and talk.
One alternative would be, and that covers the last topic a bit, to have maybe a smaller cluster with a subset of the stability test, and maybe with the pilot loads that the other tools that can be used, and run it permanently without any kind of script or on demand or whatever, and run it against weekly builds, which will pretty much ensure that the stability tests are more or less available when the branch is cut and they have run already. And will also help for get more confidence into the nightly builds, because if we move to fewer release for per year, or if people want to use master, which I think some of them are doing, it will be very useful for those load and stability to be permanent. And then we can just make decision go no go based on metrics and looking at the dashboards instead of having to do manual steps.
Or just run nightly custom?
No, run it permanently. So it's a permanent cluster, like a stability cluster, and it always has some load. I mean, it cannot be 100 CPUs, but a decent amount of load. Run continuously, and every week we change the Istio to the masters, and we update. So that will make sure that the master is always tested. So we have stability and on master. And when we cut the branch, it will be cut from whatever was there, so it's already tested, so no manual steps, and so both master will be verified and the branch that is cut.
We'd have to project the cost of it, I think. I don't know how big the current cluster is that we use.
It doesn't have to be that big anymore. I mean, it's because we have the load tests that can simulate a large number of clients of clients. So Istio load can be easily simulated without a lot of CPU, and the number of envoys doesn't have to be that big if we take that. So it can be a relatively small cluster. I mean, not very high. John, what do you?
Something.
Well, it's probably not offline. Anyway, it's an idea. It's worth considering because especially if we reduce the number of releases, it's becoming more likely that people will use nightly if they want the latest features. And nightly is not. I mean, not nightly, weekly. Let's say weekly. It's not as much tested as a beta or a regular release. So this will kind of automate more of the weekly. So make it more stable.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. Certainly something in the 20 to 30 core range isn't prohibitively expensive.
Yeah, I'm sure we can afford them. And compared to the cost of running Prow, probably it will be a rounding error.
Yeah. Let's see.
As we move to CNCF, do we get free cloud resource from CNCF too?
We get them by giving them money.
I mean, that's corporate, right? Not by the project giving them money.
Yeah,
That's
I know.
the Google Cloud or AWS. Okay.
Speaking as Google.
We can take it offline. I mean, but I think it will be much easier to maintain and to set up, because it will be just less work for the release managers. Anyway.
Yeah, I like it. Cost is not a concern. Okay, are we done with this topic? Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel, for bringing it up and going through the pain.
Costin, looks like you're up next.
Do we want to move to release to Louis topic since we just discussed about the same thing, or?
Sure. Yeah, we could talk. I mean, I'm not trying to get into the weeds of it yet, but I want people to start thinking about this. Kubernetes has 3 releases a year now. We've been doing 4 releases a year for a while. everybody hopefully has seen Mitch's studies on the adoption rate of releases.
I mean, my only comment would be Envoy's doing 4, so how do we map to that? But
Envoy and Golang.
well, Golang does 2.
Wait, right, but either way, we've got to align with each of them.
Right,
Yep.
so we would have to pick from them. We would still have to maybe pick, releases might have to pick a new Envoy build, right, for a CVE patch. Right, CVEs in Envoy still require rollouts of Envoys. We would still have to do qualification testing against it. Yeah, so there's definitely some issues there. But we have generally been pretty forward compatible with Envoy for a while. Right, because we have a well-defined contract with them. So it would be reasonable, for instance, for a patch release of Istio to pick up a new Envoy build if that was necessary. John?
Yeah, I was going to ask, so in, I don't know, a couple of releases ago, we extended the release window as kind of an experiment, and we found that that didn't actually result in any improvement. It just meant, it was actually a regression. It meant that people upgraded less and were on deprecated versions longer. They just delayed their upgrades. They didn't actually get unsupported versions. So why do we feel that this will be an improvement and not just lead to users that are on older unsupported versions for longer?
I think the reality is people stay on old versions for long periods of time, no matter what our release model is, right? Because the age of the release that the user uses is based on their internal bandwidth for executing an upgrade, right? And not our release cadence.
Isn't
So
that
this
not
is
what
really
we saw, though? I mean, when we extended the release window, we didn't see that people didn't change at all. We actually saw that they did worse and they upgraded less often.
We don't actually know if it was that their behavior changed or that more and more tenuring is occurring over time.
And also, our releases are getting better and there is less incentive to move, because if it works, they have less incentive to move. So having fewer releases will force the releases to be longer supported and will align with what users are doing and actually want to have releases that are stable and update less often.
And I'll point out that Costin did raise at the end of the last TOC meeting. We were over, so not many people were left. But Costin did raise the potential of LTS releases, picking a subset of our releases which are supported for a longer time frame. And I think that's at the top of the TOC agenda for Monday.
Yeah, so I mean, this is clearly a trade-off, right? Doing this, right? We're trading release toil for fixing bugs in chronologically older code.
But we are reducing the number of branches we need to backport it. So, and
Yeah.
we also kind of cluster users on fewer releases or fewer branches. So there are a lot of pros in this area. And speaking of trade-offs, we can compensate a bit by making the weekly build more stable, more tested. So, like Debian, the rolling release compared to the LTS.
Maybe a crazy idea, but well, maybe this is too crazy, but instead of just going towards like Kubernetes schedule, should we just cut out our January release? It's always a tiny release that is kind of useless. And then we have kind of like the busy season of the rest of the year where we have just normal every 3 months. I don't know if that fixes any problems. I would just, every time around this time of year, I always get amazed that the code freeze is coming up and we haven't actually done anything. So why are we bothering a release? But maybe if we time the 3 releases to not really schedule around Christmas or whatever, that works better anyways.
Yeah. That's an excellent idea, but I think next week we should discuss the LTS to see where we stand with that, because I think that will actually be even better for users and much better what they expect.
I guess one question I have is what is our goal? Is our goal to have users on versions that we claim are supported for longer, or is our goal to have users on newer versions?
I think the first. There is no incentive. Why would we want people to be on newer versions? I mean, we want people to be on versions that work, have all the security bugs fixed, and our support, and we can
Yeah,
support.
I guess that's so. I mean, you have a very valid point. I think that's probably actually the most common opinion. So I'm not trying to argue that you're wrong. But the way I tend to look at it is that on this old supported versions, we only fix security fixes, right? For the most part, security fixes are kind of one of those things where they either really matter or they usually don't matter at all, and you would have been perfectly fine without them, right? I don't think I've ever heard a story about an Istio vulnerability being exploited. But bug fixes are very important, and that actually impacts users every single day in production, outages, etc. Right? So people being on older supported versions, they get a false sense of security that they're in the clear, but in reality, their system has a boatload of bugs and lack of debuggability that we've already fixed. So to me, it's actually important to get users on the newer versions. I mean, this becomes less and less important as we move on. Like someone on 1.7 versus 1.10 is a lot different than 1.14 versus 1.16 because, you know, we're maturing. But yeah, go ahead.
I think you are right, but you are the root cause is not that I mean, we don't want people to be to the newest releases because bug fixes happen on the release, only in new releases. We want to, if we adopt LTS, to also make critical or important bug fixes into the older release, like Ubuntu is doing, like Debian is doing. I mean, the model is well tested, well known. You know, Debian, Ubuntu, pretty much everyone has both LTS and rolling release, and they do fix some critical bugs, but with some, I mean,
So I mean, kind of the ironic thing is that as you have an LTS that's more and more, okay, let's say we want all the bug fixes, right? Like the closer you get to all the bug fixes, you end up, your LTS degenerates into a rolling release, basically, right? Because we backport every fix, you might as well just be on the master branch.
Yeah, extremes must be avoided. So we cannot
Yeah.
roll, backport all the fixes.
Yeah.
But also cannot say just security fixes. So if we adopt LTS, it will have to be kind of middle ground where some release managers that are they know how to say no are in charge and doctor no, basically in effect.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't like the LTS Linux releases, so I'm a bit biased.
But
John,
users like them. I mean, a lot of users are actually,
I know. Yeah.
The caveat about the statement you made on security, John, is that we are sort of at this inflection point on the adoption curve, where it's taking off a lot faster than it has in the past. And when that happens, we become a much more attractive target for exploits.
Yeah, so I just want to be clear. I'm not saying that it's not important that users have security fixes. I'm just saying that if users are like, oh, I get my security fixes, I'm totally good. That's actually not true. Like security fixes are the bare minimum that you need, but you also need all the bug fixes as well.
Yeah.
And as we backport more and more bug fixes, that one causes a bunch of wasted time for us, and it also introduces more risk. So you end up that your LTS becomes less stable the more bug fixes you add potentially. Each bug fix potentially fixes a bug, but also potentially introduces new ones, right? So there's a huge trade-off, and it's quite tricky. We've shipped regressions many times. So
yeah, I also thought ambient is coming, and hopefully a lot of focus will move to ambient, and it may be more beneficial for us to keep the traditional Istio, the main branch, on LTS longer, while ambient is on a weekly release or a more frequent release. So we don't have to make a lot of them.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to honestly. I think the next Istio release should have ambient in there instead of still on a branch, because I think people were expecting us to have ambient since the initial launch in September. So the next release we're looking at like 6 months from the initial launch, or even longer. So I think people would expect us to have it. And to John's point, I don't see value of us giving out another release of Istio with all the holidays in between. So there's not going to be anything interesting to jot down in the release notes or anything.
So one thing I will say is that if we do this, we actually end up shipping ambient slower because obviously we're going to iterate on ambient quite a bit, and now those iterations are longer in between.
What if we do the nightly stable weekly? So basically, we'll have weekly releases of ambient with LTS, with stability test and everything else, and the traditional Istio LTS, and they can run in parallel. I mean, you can run Istio LTS for most workloads, and you can use Ambient for some others, since they are so you can have multiple revisions. Anyway, we can discuss Ambient next hour. I have 2 topics I want to quickly address, if you don't mind. And next week we have LTS, probably an entire meeting called
Go
to
ahead.
debate. Can I move to the destination rules?
Yeah, go ahead.
So last week or 2 weeks ago, I presented that document for people to read, and I don't know what is the status, but I think it will be very important. Usually, I'm not very for official approvals from TOC and check boxes and everything else, but I think on this topic it will be very useful for TOC to sign off and to start discussing if anyone can contribute, to the documentation update. And because the proposal is effectively to adopt the Kubernetes Gateway Gamma model for subsets and for canary deployment, meaning that instead of using the destination rule, we want to document and recommend people to use a dedicated service for each version. And this is very beneficial for Ambient because it simplifies the model on the waypoint. It's beneficial for all the people who are going to adopt Gateway and Gamma. It simplifies a lot of the code and removes a lot of corner cases that we need to bug fix and support. And it's just the documentation change. It's basically just telling people, hey, Gateway is coming, Gamma is coming. For now on, please start using the new subset model because everyone in the world is going to use it. And we'll keep supporting. We're not deprecating. It's just, we're changing the documentation to document what is we consider to be the best practice for everyone. And later on, we can discuss if we want to softly deprecate destination. Anyway, that's my request. If anyone objects to this, I would love to hear any reason why we should not do it. But yeah, John.
Yeah, I might have already mentioned this, but one thing that we, or really Frank, so thanks Frank, is doing is on the docs. I think we probably haven't done all of them, but a lot of them now have like a split tab on Istio versus Gateway API, and on the Gateway API when it does that.
Yeah, we do.
That's kind of step 1, which is already done. I guess we could go further and also do that on the Istio one. I don't necessarily have a strong opinion. I think we probably don't want to just like erase the subsets from all docs and pretend they don't exist because they're very, very common. I think that will cause confusion.
I agree.
I agree not delete, but we need to strongly encourage people and to and for Ambient, which again we can discuss, we may want to not support the subsets, at least client overrides for subsets and some of the corner cases, because again it's a lot of effort to support them and they're not very useful. And
so I guess the question to John's point is it sufficient to cover it on the Gateway tab for what you are asking?
It's a good first step, and but I mean, what I'm looking for is a way to kind of de-emphasize or treat them as advanced features, or make it clear that if you use this feature, you are forcing to use a sidecar, and you are not compatible. So basically, to have some words there that discourage people from using destination rule for new stuff. And I don't know, I'm not expert in websites and how to discourage people from using features, but first step is first of all to approve. I mean, to agree everyone that the direction is to move to the new model. That's the most important, probably.
Yeah, I think I'm fine with what we have done now. If we have scenarios where we can teach people to use the new model, I think putting a tab in there is really good. I'm cautious on modify the classical API and the examples, because that's what people been using, and a lot of people using our doc as references. It would be super confusing if we actually change to not using subsets for those.
But that's a goal to have people start migrating to HTTP to the new model, because that simplifies it. Anyway, probably.
Yeah, but when your new model is there, I think it makes sense. If the new model is not completed there,
no, the new model is there. I mean, already supported. I mean, you don't have to create a destination rule to create a subset. You create 2 services and then use virtual service. It's not a problem. The problem is to stop using the fake subsets created by destination rule, and start creating services for each subset that you need.
Yeah, the new
So
model has
every
always worked. It's just not been what we were recommending.
It has worked from the beginning of time. I mean, from the beginning of Istio, you could create two services, service V1 and service V2, and you could use virtual service to split traffic between service V1 and service V2.
Yeah, I think the challenge is, do we want to recommend that still with the classical Istio API, or do we only want to recommend that when the new Kubernetes API arrives for different routing functions?
Even without Kubernetes, we could do it.
Yeah.
Well, let's keep talking. I mean, I think it's important to have it sorted out before ambient starts to become stable, because for ambient it will be important to not have at least clients defined subsets, because they're extremely difficult to support in waypoints. I mean, the code currently is maybe working, but nightmarish. John, can I use that word without offending anyone?
Yeah, I mean, they are a nightmare in general on sidecars as well. Like, there's no namespace boundaries.
Yeah, and they cost a lot. I mean, a lot of resources. I mean, it's it was maybe a mistake. Anyway, let's TOC, please keep reviewing and think about it, and let's see if we can make.
Real quick, is there a doc you can link for us?
Oh yeah, sorry, it was in the previous meetings. I'll update it after.
Thank you.
So next topic, if you can open the doc, it's very early. I'm not. I still need to work on it, but we had a very long discussion about the API for persistent sessions, and there is a lot of discussion in the gRPC proxy gRPC world about this as well. And I mean, you can read the doc. I mean, I just want people to start thinking about it and read a bit. The short version is there is a solution that customers are using for persistent solutions using envoy filter, but it has a number of limitations. One is that versions and subsets are not very well supported, and for that, I'm proposing a solution based on what we discussed previously, adopting the service per version. And the other problem is on ingress, persistent sessions cannot work very well because envoy implementation is based on clear text IPM port, and that is not something that you typically want or people typically use on ingress. And I am proposing that we start using the external OZ to support an encrypted cookie. So basically, that's a longer term project. I mean, I don't know if we'll ever do it, but it's probably the right solution and consistent with what other implementation of persistent sessions are doing. But the questions really for this group is if we want to revive the API discussion, I mean, and to provide the first class API, or we just leave it as hidden feature or envoy filter. And second, if we are comfortable with this approach of service per subset and using the routing. If you scroll down, there is some discussion about persistent session is a mesh and how we can do it. Yeah, that's a TLDR. I mean, it's a bit complicated because the two models are very different. I mean, with the internet and with, yeah, that's it. We'll discuss it probably next week or after people have more time to read it, and I update based on the comments.
Okay. If there are no comments there, I'll snag the last couple of minutes to double back to the topic we skipped. I'm proposing a command to be added in Istio control. We've discussed this command on a number of occasions over the last few years, but I've only just begun to have time to work on it. The purpose of the command is to let users know what vulnerabilities exist in a given Istio installation. So it would be something along the lines of called vuln check or vulnerability check. And it would report out for each component in the mesh, be it a data plane or a set of data planes, a gateway, a control plane, what CVEs those resources are subject to. It'll do that using a data set provided by the NIST that we already publish our CVE information to. So the data is already out there. It's just leveraging this existing API to report vulnerability data. I'm also hoping to add a passive scanning component, which will effectively say, even if you're not running the vuln check command, if you're running a command that does get versions of Istio from, say, the control plane or data plane, it will report incidentally if there are known CVEs with a very non-intrusive warning message. The reason I bring this up here in particular is because this may have some interesting implementation or implications for vendors of Istio. That is, if you are running a vendored version of Istio, the CVEs for a given version may be different in your installation than they would be in open source Istio. This was, as I understand it, is still true at Google, where Anthos service mesh versions may have patches that open source versions don't have, etc. So I can see that John has been active in the document. Thank you, John. Others, if you could just take a look, particularly if you have a vendored version of Istio that you distribute, let me know what you think of the doc and how you would like this command to work for your particular use case. Yeah, Greg.
Sorry, haven't had a chance to review the doc yet, but is this going to be independent of Istio version? Like, say this feature for Istio CTL launches in 1.17. If they run this vulnerability check on 1.17 and say again on 1.18 with different Istio CTL binaries, they'll still get the same results, right?
It should continue to work even for future versions because it gets its vulnerability data from this API.
Okay.
So there's no need for the vulnerabilities to be known at build time. I have requested review from the folks at ChainGuard to get a little bit more of a security specific perspective on this. I haven't heard back from them yet, but I will be getting some sort of sign off from them to make sure, because I'm not a security engineer. So making sure that we're doing this in a way that does in fact help users is important. Anyways, if you get a chance, take a look at it. Specifically for you vendors, let me know what you think of it, and that's it. And I think that's everything on the agenda today as well. Any last minute? All right. Well, in that case, thanks everyone for joining, and I'll see most of you in 3 minutes at the Ambient meeting.